I was flying this Bonanza over there, and the first couple of years the weather was nice, and one year, it was the last year, a lot of thunderclouds, a lot of build-ups, and I got up to about, I don't know, 10,500 feet or something like that. Jesus Christ, I saw this huge thing. This thing, I couldn't circumvent it, and I didn't have the guts to go through it or the knowledge. So I almost did a 180. And just as I was about to make that decision, which means I wouldn't have gotten to the gas Berlin, an opening came up. So I shot down there.
Oh.
And
Nancy.
Nancy was not with me. I was
I know, but still, she'd known she was.
Yeah. So anyway, the point of my story is this. I always went down for lunch.
Yeah.
And I had the wisdom to only spend about max 2 hours, because we eat and we talk and eat and so forth. And then, I quietly stepped aside because I knew if I stayed much longer, it would interfere with his daily routine. Maybe he wants to take a nap. Should I take a nap as much as I can? And so it always ended up like, hey, I'll see you next year. Whereas if I overstayed and stayed, 3 or 4 hours, he would say to himself, God, I wish the hell this guy would get out of town, No, but we had a good time down there.
It was a good amount of time.
And he introduced me to a very, very lovely place, that Gasparilla Inn.
Yeah.
That's something that, hey, the next time you have a retreat,
Yep.
there you go. You ought to shoot for that Gasparilla Inn. I'm telling you, Libby, you've been there.
It's great. Yeah.
So, who am I to make recommendations to you people? But let me just say, if I were on the Surdna board and if I were chairman, the next retreat would be at the Gasparilla Inn.
I
No
like it.
question about it.
I like it too.
We won't forget, will we, Mark?
We will not forget that.
Peter Benedict said.
Peter Benedict.
No, it's just a totally different lifestyle. It's like Vero Beach used to be back in '69,
Right.
Where is
70.
this? Which part of the?
It's on the West Coast.
On the West Coast.
Yeah.
Near.
I'm there. Libby will help us remember that we've made.
Oh yeah, you don't forget Gasparilla Inn.
I'll remind
Mark
you too.
remembered it right away.
Yeah.
But
No, well, he always enjoyed those visits so
Oh,
much.
God.
Talked about them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but we had laughs,
Yeah.
and he always reminisced, and he reminisced frequently of one or two things that I might share in this video. But he loved my mother, and my mother adored him.
They got in trouble, those two.
I know that. More so than the average
Two of a
family
kind.
member might. I said, good for them. It's
Yeah.
awful quiet back there, guys. What are you doing?
They're filming
We
you.
were just still rolling off the cuff.
Now, let's get going here.
What was you about
Money
to
is
tell a
time, and
story?
time is money, right?
You were about to tell a story. Why?
So what did they used to do, the two of them? Your mom and my father?
I think the most memorable experience I recall is that he would visit, and there were numerous laughters coming from the house.
Uh-huh.
And one time, my mother had gotten a new Robin's Egg Blue Cadillac, and she wanted to show it off to John, convertible. So she takes the car out and goes down North Broadway, which is the main drag in that area. And on the way back, she goes down maybe 5 miles, and on the way back, she kicks the speed up to like 65 miles an hour, which was, in those days, fast,
Yeah.
because the speed limit was like 35. So on the way back, they're about a mile away, and they're going up this hill, and a motorcycle cop pulls her over. The real trooper with the boots and the whole thing. And this is the way John explains it. The top is down now. My mother didn't have a hat on. The hair was flying and all that. John was kind of, and the trooper comes in and he says, "Oh my God, Eleanor Benedict." Basically, "How are you, Eleanor? It's great to see you. I haven't seen you for a while." And so they chatted. No ticket, no warning, no anything. And John was always amazed of that particular experience,
Right.
because it didn't happen once with him, it happened twice. And the same cop, the second time, But apparently he did say, as they shook hands goodbye, "Now, Eleanor, please watch your speed next time."
I've heard that. Yeah, he
Yeah.
loved that story. He said he was telling Eleanor, "Eleanor, slow down. Eleanor, be quiet when
Yeah.
the cop comes in."
Yeah, yeah.
Of course she didn't.
No, she had that. I remember that car so vividly. Mark, it was one of those cars in those days where it was sharp. you know.
Sharp, convertible.
Yeah.
Yeah,
White
Robin's egg
interior.
blue. I
Yeah.
don't know what the interior was.
Well, and he talked about your dad. He was very fond of your dad.
Through
and
him,
your
yeah.
grandmother.
No.
And lots of Benedict stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We ready to go here?
Sure, we're ready to go.
Okay,
How
let's-
you feel good?
We're ready.
Should we do
Okay.
a little technically-
Whatever.
Okay, whatever.
Oops, that was second sticks.
She was.
It's like Hollywood.
Ah, we're not, exactly. And we're not gonna do that every time. So, can you just...
Speak up. I want to, don't be bashful.
Okay. We just would love you to introduce yourself and talk about where you are in the family.
Well, I've always wanted to know where I was in the family. But my name is Peter Benedict. And we moved to Vero Beach in 1969. And Nancy and I have always said that luck and timing play a tremendous part in one's life. And I was extremely fortunate, lucky, to first of all marry Nancy. It was a blind date set up by our grandmothers,
Oh, really?
Wow.
Oh,
Really?
I didn't know that.
by our grandmothers. And I was teaching at a boys' school in Connecticut. And Nancy was working for Good Housekeeping magazine as the administrative assistant to Wade Nichols, the editor. And as soon as I met her at her apartment, we hit it off just like that. But here is the key. Blind date now. I go up, drive all the way in from Connecticut. I used to coach as well as teach, so it was a late start. Get in, knock on the door, her mother comes. And I introduced myself. She, of course, knew who I was. And her father just came back from work. He was a lawyer in the city. And he said, "Would you like a drink?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll have a scotch on the rocks." And I'm telling you, he made a bomb. And I sat down in the living room and looked down the hallway. And I finished that one drink. And then he said, "Let me just put a freshener on there, a little sweetener." And being that I was trying to make an impression, I said, "Yeah, go ahead, So I see this, voluptuously beautiful younger woman walking down the hallway. It's a pretty good sized apartment on Park Avenue. And it turned out to be, and her mother said, no, that's not Nancy. That was Nancy's sister. So anyway, the whole thing is Nancy came out shortly thereafter, and one thing led to another. And I'm not going to go into all the details, but needless to say, we both got wiped out that first night and had a great time.
Good ending.
Yeah, good ending, good beginning, whatever.
Yeah.
So getting back to your question, which I kind of strayed from, I was raised in Yonkers, New York, and I was from a matriarchal society. I never knew my father, and I was raised by a grandmother and a mother, both totally different. My grandmother was a force. My mother was happy-go-lucky, a very extremely popular lady. She had many friends, and she was an outstanding golfer. So she got a lot of notoriety of that in the local papers about her golfing abilities. My grandmother, in the meantime, was running a herd on Surdna. And when I say running a herd on Surdna, she was. They may have had committees. They may have had this, they may have had that. But by God, when Helen Benedict said, "We will do this," they did it. And let me just say there was not very much collaboration. But she was very domineering at home. And therefore, she was very domineering at Surdna. And I remember somehow, when I was in my later teens, going into New York, and she invited me to a Surdna meeting. And I'm telling you, I guess I was still pretty young and I was very impressionable. We walk into this conference room, nothing like it is today.
On Park Avenue.
Yeah, and there were about, let's say, a dozen members of the board, and everybody in suits, all men, and she drove it like a Wrangler. I mean, there was no, everyone knew who was the chairman of the board. And while we're on the subject of Surdna, the evolution was considerable. In those days, and in the days when I first went on the Surdna board, the giving was very straightforward. I could understand it. The giving was primarily to such things as medicine, education, the arts in Minneapolis, things that interested family members who were on the board. And I could understand that. I could get a grasp of it. And when my son Peter comes back from the meetings, and we might chat a little bit about the Surdna meetings, things seem so esoteric today. Entirely different generational point of view. And of course, he totally thrives on that kind of stuff. But I'm kind of, you might say, the old guard. Hard to change ways. So we go back then to Hastings, where I have now moved with my grandmother. In the meantime, my mother, God bless her, got cancer when she was very young. She was 34, 35. And in those days, nothing. They just hacked away. And so she passed away when she was probably 40 years old, Christmas, 1954. And so that left my grandmother and I in the home. Now, during the evolution of my mother's experience, I had come back from camp, summer camp. I was 9, 10 years old, and somehow had contacted hepatitis from the water in the camp. And it took several months for the doctors to realize what was the matter with me. So I ended up spending 11 months at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in bed. Now, I was it didn't hurt. I wasn't in pain, but I had some major problems. And in those days, the only thing they could do was to tell you to rest and eat protein and rest and eat protein, so forth. Anyway, I was finally given the light to go home, and I was able to live in the second floor of the house. I couldn't go downstairs or go outside. I was kind of forbidden to go up there at this point, because I was trying to reestablish my physical nature. And finally, after about 3 or 4 months, they allowed me to go downstairs. And boy, that was a big deal. And then after a month or two more, I was able to go outside, and pretty soon, I rallied and got all together again. So there was a big chunk of time where I missed a lot of schooling. And obviously, I was always a horrible student. Even if I take it for granted, if I never got sick, I was a poor student. And I never really made it up, made the courses up. You just can't do, it was actually 4 years I missed. And you may have a tutorial now and then, but, it just didn't cover it. So it came time to go to college. And I knew I wanted to go to college, and I barely got through having a diploma. Let's say if there were 99 graduates in the high school class, I graduated 100. That's the kind of a student I was. So anyway, I was wondering, where will I go to college? So I go down, I became a Sunbelt kid then, because I was so used to staying inside, you know, and I couldn't get outside, so I wanted to just go, it's free. So anyway, I remember I wanted to go to Rollins College, and the head of the particular school I was going to said basically I didn't, you know, forget college, go in the Marine Corps or something like that, because my health had really come back. And of course, I eventually was able to go in the service. But anyway, at this time, I'd go to Rollins College, drive into campus, and my eyes were like this, because all I saw were some absolutely beautiful women, girls. Now understand, I've been incapacitated for so long, I thought I died and went to heaven. And I had no transcripts, and I said, I have to pursue this big time. So that very moment, I parked the car, go into the administration building, and ask if the admissions director was available. Didn't even know his name. And the secretary said, let me find out. And fortunately, he was home. She said, Peter, sit over here. He'll be available in a few minutes. So he comes out and introduces himself, and I introduce myself, and I'm sure he wondered what I was doing there. I said, the reason I'm here, because I want to go to your college. And I came down personally right now because my marks are not good, but I think I can, you know, bob and weave through the seriousness of the college. Wink, wink. Anyway, he said after about 25 minutes, about 11:30, then 11:45, let's go to lunch. Takes me to lunch. When I get back from lunch, go to his office, he said, Peter, you can start next fall. And this was May. So I entered Rollins in those days without a transcript, without anything. Now today, of course, you couldn't even breathe such an idea. So anyway, I had a great situation there. I love that place. So we can go on and on from there.
And did you bring some of that fire and tenacity to the board?
Fire what?
And tenacity and
I don't know if I brought any, I'm sure I brought fire to the board. I don't know about tenacity, but you're talking about,
I'm just
which board are you talking about?
Surdna board.
Surdna board. Did I bring fire and tenacity? That's a good question. I tried to bring a seriousness of purpose. I tried to let everybody have time around the table to, you know, talk about a particular situation. There was one or perhaps two members who had a tendency, certainly one member, who had a tendency to just, when given the green light to talk about the issue, would not stop. And I remember having to tell this individual after, say, 10 minutes, I said, okay, thanks very much. And, you know, we can talk about it at break or something further. But he went back and started, you know, and that was the one little challenge I had among the board members. I think everybody else was collegial. We certainly, you know, had moments of agreement, and certainly we had moments of disagreement, but that's what makes a good organization. And I was blessed to be surrounded by good people, because if you're surrounded by good people, good things happen. And Ed Skloot was the CEO most of the time, and he hired some very good people to run the various interests. And one person I remember very vividly was Ellen Rudolph, who, by the way, was in the arts. And she and I hit it off right away because she was a jazz lover, and I live and sleep jazz, even today. And I recall one time she called here and said, we're thinking of giving a donation to the Duke Ellington High School Challenge, sponsored by the Wynton Marsalis group there at the Lincoln Center. I said, wow. I said, Ellen, do it. You know, check with whoever you have to check with, but make the recommendation, and hopefully we'll see it's approved, which happened. And I recall going there that first time where there was the high school jazz competition, and Nancy was with me, and Peter was with me, and Davis was with me. And we had, you know, obviously fairly decent seats, since the foundation was basically sponsoring this thing. And I was just absolutely taken aback by the talent of these young high school musicians. I mean, they just were terrific. And so I think Surdna even today might be doing something to the
We are.
Went Marsalis thing. Of course, now it's nationwide, whereas then it was just kind of regional. And then along those same lines, I happened to be out in California on some business. This is a personal business, nothing a non-family related business. And I asked, Peter was going to college then, and I said, hey, listen, why don't you go out there and join me? And there happened to also be a high school jazz competition in Monterey. And we walk in there and sit down, and we were late, so the band, one of the bands was, and we pick up the program. And Peter says, hey, look, Dad, this is sponsored by Surdna. I mean, that came out of the blue. It's probably the first time that I actually read about a Surdna grant that I had no idea of was something I really approved of. But that was a memorable, very memorable moment. But by and large, I had a great time. I was on the board for a long time. And what are the dates that I was on the board? Hint. Once again, let's stay chronologically with the way things developed. The first board I served on was JEA, and I was on that board forever. I did it, number one, out of respect for Helen Benedict, and I also knew it was a great challenge to do that because I was headmaster of a growing school here in Vero Beach. And things were popping here. But I made time to go up to the retirement center, during the meetings. And then after so many years, the current chair resigned when one of the meetings began. And John Andrus, who was the vice chair, stepped in. And John said, one of the first items of business I'm going to present is I'd like to recommend Peter Benedict, this chair of the John Andrus board. I said, oh, John. I said, no way I can do that. I said, I'm running a school down here, and that's my paying job, and that's what I enjoy doing, and that's what I probably should continue doing. I mean, I can't do both, He said, oh, don't worry about it. He said, all you got to do is run the meetings. Well, I can tell you, he put one over on me big time, because, as you know, when you're chair of a board, there's a lot more than just running a meeting. So I found myself going up there frequently. And it was a long, arduous, not always pleasant experience, because I had, the background of the family there, my mother and so forth. But nevertheless, I felt dedicated to ride right into that, retirement center. I enjoyed the older folks. I think one of the highlights for me, as simple as it might be, is when I went up there to spend the night and to have dinner or breakfast with them and communicate with them. And please understand, when my grandmother built that in 1954, it began as an independent living facility. And with time, aging in place took place. And it went from independent living to assisted living, and then to nursing. There have been huge challenges along the way. The federal government has come into it. The state has come into it. No matter which way you turn, there's something that's going to impede your progress. When John Andrus, the John Andrus, stated on his will that he wanted to have opportunity for the youth, and that's exemplified by the Julia Dykeman, and comfort for the aged. Now, of course, that home was not built when John Anders was alive, because he died in 34. The home was built in 1954 and through Surdna funds, but my grandmother spearheaded the development, and subsequently she devoted a lot of her life up there. And it was a different place because she knew all the residents, and the residents were able to move about and, you know, walk the beautiful grounds. And right now you don't quite see that. You see a lot of people who are aged and so forth. But anyway, it is a struggle to maintain the quality that you want to see in a home for retirement people. You do want to give them comfort. You want to give them, you know, opportunities. You want to have them exercise facilities available. You want to have them, you know, do things with the community, and vice versa, invite the community in, and on and so forth. And that's okay, but it's still the challenges along the way, passing this license and that license.
So Peter, you were there at the grand opening of the.
Yeah, I was
Old
there when
age
they
home?
dug. Yeah, when they put the first shovel in, I was there.
And then you were there at the 50th anniversary in 2003, 2004.
Well, I was supposed to be there, but
Oh, Peter Jr.
Yeah,
came.
Peter.
Mark,
Yeah,
get
yeah,
this,
yeah.
that was the year of the hurricanes down
That's
here,
right. That's
and
right.
our house was totally blown away, and we moved here. And I remember that was kind of a last minute thing because the hurricanes came literally 3 or 4 days before that event. So
I may actually back you up a little bit and have you retell the story of how you were asked to be on the board, to chair the board. Just for editing purposes.
oh, you mean for John? Yeah, at the
Yeah,
old folks home.
Well, no, of the board of Surdna. You were telling the story about how you were, you thought it was just going to be for meetings.
Yeah.
But it was actually. Can you tell that story again? I know you already told the
Yeah,
viewers a little.
well, you know, I had been attending meetings with the retirement facility for, you know, a while. And the chair at the time was a person by the name of Ed McGee, who subsequently followed my grandmother because she passed away in '69 and so forth. Anyway, Ed McGee, at the start of the meeting, said that he was retiring. I mean, just like that. Nobody had any warning or anything like that. So John, you know, in his classy way, you know, pushed the gavel down and said, you know, well, welcome everybody. And we all took a deep breath because, you know, we didn't know what was going on with Eddie McGee. And he said, the first time of business I have is to recommend Peter Benedict as the chair of this facility. And that's a big, you know, big responsibility. Eddie McGee lived very close there in Connecticut, so he would go down there on a daily basis. You know, he'd keep his thumb on to run an organization like that. You've got to be there. You've got to make frequent appearances. You've got to be omnipresent, so to speak, as exemplified by the children's home and say Larry Griffith, for instance. That guy has lived and breathed the children's home. And fortunately, Larry lives close by. But, you know, you're living in Vero Beach, Florida, and you just can't pop on the next flight up there because there are not that many flights, if any. So it's an arduous task to get up there. But more importantly, as I stated, I had an obligation to the Board of Trustees at the St. Edward's School here, which we were growing. And while I came, the school was only 33 kids. And when I left, there was 910. And we had 2 campuses, and the place was really moving in the right direction. So you can see there was responsibility. You can't, you know, you can give different responsibilities to different people, but you better make damn sure that you choose the right person when you give that responsibility, and then let them go. You know, let them do the job. So I found it very difficult to get from point A to point B and to feel like I really got control of the situation. So I made a lot of phone calls, there were a lot of conference calls, but it's not the same. Not the same.
But ultimately, I'd say you decided to do it, which is a huge responsibility.
Yeah, because of
Why?
Helen Benedict.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think that.
Well, yeah, because my grandmother lived and breathed the place. I mean, she built it. She felt very strongly about it. She felt a deep faith for the cause. She rode for the brand, you know. She wanted to get up there. She rode for the Anders brand, you know, because that was her father's request, giving comfort to the aged. That was the second half of it. But the thing about John Anders' will, as I think I mentioned before, the monies were supposed to be spent funding totally the children's home and eventually the retirement facility. In other words, they survived on the Surdna giving every year. So the homes could depend upon it. And the other part of the foundation was for different more minor philanthropies. But the thrust of it was the two homes. But then as time changed, the board, and I was on the board of Surdna at the time, they wanted to become independent facilities for a number of right reasons. In other words, you had to change with the times. Government interference and one thing or another and so forth. But so now, I believe, Mark, the homes request a grant annually, but it's nothing like it was before. Mm-hmm. They are independent facilities, but they do get smaller grants on, I guess, a regular basis from, annually from Surdna. Right. But nothing like it was back in the day, so to speak.
So that's a huge shift. Can you talk a little bit more about what then followed? What was the next after the homes? What was the next on the agenda, and who? Well,
let me, if I may. At one point, I'm really wondering how it was all done. But at one point, number one, I was the headmaster of the school. Number two, I was chair of the Surdna board. Number three, I was chair of the retirement facility. And I was also on the board of the Julia Dyckman home. I was not the chair. And that was done for a number, you're talking, in some cases, I think the highest was about 38 years. And the average was probably about 30 of service to the boards. But during that time of all that, I mean, that's a busy time. And as Nancy was saying, if I weren't young and really stupid, I would never have taken it on, because it was a huge job. It was a huge job, an enormous job. But while my grandmother rode for that brand, the old folks home, I kind of rode for the family brand, the Anders brand. I'm waving the big A on the flag here, because I was fortunate to be born in the family. Just think about that. Never knew my father. And I was just, I was so lucky. I have been so lucky, because not only was I born into the family, but, I survived all the health issues. And then, of course, as I got older, I became much closer to John Anders, because we saw each other at the Surdna meetings. And right away, we really hit it off. And I always regarded John as really my surrogate father. And I think he sometimes regarded me as maybe the son, son he didn't have, and so forth and so on. But we were very tight. We were very close. He was probably the closest relative that I certainly had. And as you know, the family is huge. But I was very fortunate to have had the experience of knowing John. And occasionally I would call him in my younger days to ask for advice. And the great thing about it is he always gave it, whether I liked it or not. And he was certainly a keeper. I love the guy. So, what else?
I guess in general, do you want to talk about some of the accomplishments that happened during the time that you were serving? I mean, it's quite a span, but some of the highlights that you talk about, jazz supporting, but are there certain areas or certain things you're most proud of?
At Surdna?
From the time that you were serving.
Well, I think what I'm most proud of, besides being able to serve at that capacity, is getting to know the family members and realizing that there are members of the family who are really outstanding people. One example is, of course, Libby, we all know, but at an earlier time was Edie Thorpe, because she established what I still think today is the most important component of Surdna, and that is the Anders Family Fund, which allows for the younger generation to evolve and understand philanthropy and actually get their hands on it and experience it. And that is it's a wonderful thing for the family, and I think that has really transpired into something major. I know on a national scale it's been discussed because of its success, and it took a leader to see it succeed. And I recall at one Surdna meeting, she asked for volunteers to serve on that committee because I knew it was going to take time. I did not volunteer, and 3 people did. And then I remember after the meeting, she said, "Peter, would you kindly reconsider and become a committee member?" And I couldn't say no. I couldn't say no because I love youth, or I wouldn't be in education, and I really cared for Edie. But that was a big accomplishment. That's one accomplishment that I don't take credit for, but somebody else does, and I get more really happiness from something like that. And of course, it was wonderful to see Libby on the board because I kind of felt at home, and she always had some wonderful things, especially about the arts. I mean, that was your big interest area, as I recall, and always had some coaching comments.
Oh, can we move the doggies?
I know, I was just about to say that. Do you mind? The dog is
In his spot.
I don't know why it's still on my I know the guy so well. Libby missed that. I don't think she was here then, but after the program here, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Oh, it's not part of. Can you talk a little bit how decisions are made? It sounds like the decision to make a younger generation committee. I mean, how are you specifically making decisions for things to happen when you were on the board?
How do I expect?
How were decisions made? Was it?
How were decisions made? Oh, okay, I got you. That's all I want to know. I can go with it. How are decisions made? I think that's a good question. I tried to be slightly collaborative, but it wasn't really my style, because I learned from building a school. The more committees you have, the more drag, the more hindrances you're going to have. And I'm a very impatient person. And I knew that I had to call the shots, and I did it. Right or wrong, when a decision was made or had to be made, I made it. I didn't have to, sleep on it. I said, this is going to happen, that's going to happen, we will do it this way. And I wanted to make sure the board of trustees knew who was running the show, because sometimes in independent schools, some boards have a tendency to usurp the headmaster's authority. And once that happens, you're gone. You can have the ideal situation is to have a good headmaster and a good board chair. You've got a winning combination. That school is going to succeed big time. You can have a weak chair and a strong headmaster, and it's going to survive, but not as quickly and not as effective. But you can't have a weak headmaster and a strong chair, because it's going to go south. And of course, you can't have either one weak at the same time, because that's going to go south as well. So I learned from that you really have to stand up and be counted. And I think in retrospect, I should have had more, committee collaboration, you might say, because today it's such a different generational situation with different leadership. All much better than I ever thought of being. And that's the way to go today. But once again, as I say, you got to change with the times. And the times were such when I was chair, and that's the way I did it. And hey, if they didn't like it, so what? It's got to be done.
So was it, was it a vote, or it was a discussion?
Oh yeah, there were
and then
votes,
you
of
went
course. No, I wasn't like Helen Benedict. I didn't say there was no vote under Helen Benedict. I mean, they may have put it in the minutes. There was a vote. Yeah, you bet there was a vote. But no, there was a vote. But you try and see that the votes are going to end up the way you hope they will. Sometimes they did. Sometimes they didn't.
Can we, do you want us to interject at all, or should we not?
I think maybe I'll ask one more question and then sort of
Okay.
open it up for you.
No, I
guys
just
to
was gonna, I'll just say that your leadership, not on camera, your leadership style was fabulous.
Oh.
We could have used a bit more of it, because
Yeah,
sometimes
right. Well, anyway,
conversations
thank you very much,
went
Libby.
on and on and on.
God
and
bless
on.
you. God bless you.
We were just hoping, please,
Yeah.
a decision.
No, you got to watch. No, I remember that. I remember how cognizant I was of the timing, because a meeting, like if I schedule, I'm out of the school business here right now, as you know, but I got some other things going on. But if I schedule a meeting, and I say, we're going to meet from 10 to 11 this morning, the meeting is from 10 to 11, and I say, hey, the hour's up. Thanks very much for coming. It's over. So I think it's very important
Yeah.
to respect the timing of people.
That's all I wanted to.
I actually,
I was going to say, we throw up one more light too, because
We don't have ice cream.
All the yogurt and the milk.
right. Okay. So do you want to jump in and
Sure,
finish? Yeah.
sure. So Peter, what we were talking about before we came here is that you're one of the few individuals that was very close to Helen Benedict, obviously, and you were there through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and into the 2000s. So
Correct.
you really have the wide scope of Surdna's development. So we were curious, I mean, maybe a starting point is, when you first got involved at Surdna, I guess Eddie McGee was the chair.
That's correct.
Helen had just stepped off. You came on, and you were on with Eddie McGee. And then maybe if you could sort of talk about the transition from there. At that point, the two homes were the largest part of the Surdna giving, and sort of how the leadership went and how the grant making went, because that is now the biggest part of Surdna, and it was just the opposite when you were there.
That's correct.
And sort of
Yeah.
that transition, because
Then
you're really the
180
only one that has that breadth
Well,
of experience.
so what is the first
The
part?
first, maybe just who exactly was at chairmanship and how did that go through? So Helen was through 68, I think,
Yeah.
1968,
Then Eddie McGee took over,
and Eddie McGee took over.
and then of course John Anders took over.
And that was probably the mid 80s or so?
Something like that.
Something in the
Something
mid-eighties.
like
He
that.
came on the board, and the first day he was elected chairman
Yeah.
of the board.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah,
Oh, that's the way to
that
do
was
it.
his initiation.
That's
Trial by
he,
fire.
yep. And of course John just did such an exemplary job, and the reason I respected it so much is because he, didn't hesitate to make a strong decision and a timely decision, and
Right.
he wanted to keep the board meeting moving all the time, and then one thing led to another, and then eventually I became chair. But I recall we always talk about the wonderful things the grants do. And I was always a little bit dubious, even though the grants at the time that I recall and really loved with Surdna were things I can get my hands around. I understood medicine, I understood education, and things of that nature, and some personal things like I mentioned in Minneapolis. But what really got me was then we started becoming a little bit esoteric, in my opinion.
Was that when Ed Skloot came on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little esoteric, and I started losing the thread of, what the hell am I doing here? And so I respected Ed. It was a different point of view. And as I said, he picked some fine people who were in charge of the various interests. But there was one committee. It had to do with, I want to say something like effective citizenry or something
That's
like
correct.
that. It's very nebulous, I don't know.
Effective citizen.
And we were going to, the Surdna was going to fund renovation of an apartment complex in New York. And we took a field trip and looked at the apartment and went up to one of the units. And of course, that unit was aware of the fact that we were visiting, so it was sparkling. And then basically we were told that, you know, in 8 to 12 months, the building will look like this. And I recall when Ed and I and the rest of the group were getting in the bus, I said, Ed, you know something? That's absolute pure bullshit. And we go back, I don't know, a year later maybe, and the place was trashed. The whole entire building. I mean, that one room, they didn't know we were coming, you see, that was the key. Everything went down. And so I think a lesson was learned there, that not all the grants are successful grants. And I think at the time it was hard for people to understand that, oh my God, we made a mistake. Well, you know, so what? You got to learn from your errors. And even today, I'm sure there's some grants that go out that don't really sparkle 100%. And that's life, you know, you learn from it.
Well, Peter, do you remember the grants that were made, not to the homes, but in those early years when Ed McGee was involved and, you know, besides the homes, what that process was like and what kind of grant making back then was sort of memorable to you?
Somewhat, in the days when I first came there, it was a lot like Helen Benedict. In other words, it went to the main thrust of the you know, the medicine, the education, and so forth and so on. There was nothing like effective citizenry or the environment, which I certainly approve of. I don't know whether Surdna has that now or not.
We do.
But you know, that's important.
Are you talking about when Lindsley?
Yeah, when Lindsley Hummerkhausen was a
Part-time
grant
consultant?
consultant, did you get involved in talking with her about particular grants and anything particularly memorable from
I
those years?
remember Lindsay very well. I know she would call, and it was on a personal level because of educating one of her kids and so forth. But I don't recall speaking to Lindsay necessarily about Surdna. It wasn't that dynamic between us at that time. And I think my mind was as much here on the school as it was probably up there at the time.
Right.
I remember it was one of my first meetings that we'd get a notebook that thick, and everything was already done, and we'd go through page by page,
Yeah.
grant by grant.
Oh, that's right.
Yes.
You see, Libby's mind is so much more keener than mine, obviously. But, you know, Libby is correct. I remember that. We would come with these books, like, I mean, they were big books.
Huge.
And Lindsay would condense it, verbalize it, and so forth and so on to expedite the process. But it still took a long time.
And we went page by page.
Page by
Yeah.
page, and oh, God.
And then lunch.
Then
And
lunch.
We went page by page pretty quickly.
Yeah. Got quicker than lunchtime. You're right, Lib.
Actually, I want to talk a little bit conceptually, or ask you questions that are a little more conceptual. I remember you were talking about values last time that kind of stayed throughout the entire picture here. So through 100 years, there's certain values that have remained the same, even if strategies, grant giving, all this stuff has changed. Can you talk a little bit about what you see as the core values of Surdna and how they make
Well, I think one of the values is the fact that everybody wants to see it succeed. Everybody is proud to serve on the Surdna board because it does so much good for so many people. I think there's a great deal of integrity involved with the board. I know there was one situation along the way where that wasn't necessarily the case, but that was removed, and the board did the correct thing in that. And it's just a very good, solid feeling there that everybody is riding for the cause. And as I said earlier, riding for the brand, because it's such an important foundation. One of the biggest ones. Was it near $1 billion now, isn't it?
$1 billion.
It is?
Yeah.
Congratulations, sir. Mark, what was it when you arrived?
$280 million in 1990.
Good Lord.
And
There you
then,
see it. Isn't that amazing? $1 billion?
Yeah.
And we've given away, or Surdna has given away about $650 million during that period of time. To give you an idea.
You know, I sit here looking at Mark, and I'm thinking to myself how fortunate the foundation has been and will continue to be to have the expertise and leadership of Mark Devenosh. Not only is he an expert financier with tremendous financial prowess, but he's also one hell of a nice guy.
Thanks, Peter.
And you put all three of those together, you got a pretty good person there, you know?
And he served not only Surdna, but Anderson-Hudson.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
And he knows more about our family than our family does.
He certainly does. He knows more about I remember after I got off the old folks home board. You know, I got back here and I resigned from everything in '95 because of some health issues, as I mentioned. So a year or two went by and I was feeling a little better. And so I call Mark. I say, "Hey, Mark, basically, how are things going at the retirement center?" "Oh, everything's great. You know, God, the enrollment, geez, we're almost full, you know, everything else. And I always, when I hung up, felt so much better. And then, of course, I spoke to the CEO there, and of course, everything was wonderful. And then after the second call, Mark leveled with me a little bit more and helped me out. But I think Mark realized that I was coming through some tough times. He didn't want to make things more difficult.
Right. If we did get through some tough times, though.
Yeah.
But Peter, some of the best stories I've heard you tell is the years you were living in the Helen Benedict house. And just so you know, we're about to put some money into Helen Benedict house and renovate and fix the windows and the gutters and everything else that needs to get done. But you had some wonderful years there.
I did.
And you've told me about some of the little antics that you were involved in there. And if you could talk about the Helen Benedict house. And,
Yeah,
and
well, it was
your
quite
years.
quite a unique place. It was just below the retirement facility on magnificent grounds. And they were magnificent because my grandmother had a green thumb. She had a green fist. And she hired a tremendous group of gardeners at the time. And she would be out there planting, I mean, herself. I'm not saying planting trees, but all kinds of flowers. So if you go up there in the fall or the spring, I hope it's still the same, that the flowers are in bloom and the view of the Hudson River is absolutely incredible. And I remember when I was kind of a teenager and I was, you know, back to normalcy health-wise, I had my room was downstairs, and I had a separate entrance and exit. And the reason I loved it is because I enjoyed dating girls, and there were a lot. Yeah, thank God, girls. But anyway. There are a lot of times when I used the entrance and exit in the back there. And
And where were you headed?
well, where was I headed? Yeah, where was I coming from?
Where were you
Well,
coming
from? My a great evening for me at those times were I was probably 16, but I looked older. I mean, I was about the same height and everything, and I would get a date or so. And go into this place called Birdland, which was a noted jazz place in New York.
The northern
the
part of
original Birdland.
Northern Manhattan,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It was on Broadway.
Broadway.
And I had gone there so many times that the MC, the guy was named Pee Wee Marquette. He was a midget, but because I tipped him. I always impressed my date because we had a front row table for two right in front of the band. And I was in there, on 2 times a week anyway. So I became fairly well known there. And I got to know some musicians, which I loved. Miles Davis. When I say no, he didn't say, "Hey, Peter, how are you? Let's," but we chatted on not more than one, probably 2 or 3 occasions. He would recognize me and so forth. I'm just giving you an idea. And then, we heard some great musicians in there. And then on the way home, one thing led to another. But I recall one time going into New York to some other place in New York with a date, and we came out and we couldn't find a car. The car had been stolen. And so I go to the police station with this gal. And, I said, "I'd like to report the missing XYZ." And so I sat down with her, and it was quite an experience sitting in that police station for so long, because I thought the car was totaled. Anyway, about 2 hours go by, and the guy said, "We found your car." And he told me where it was, and he said the problem is, they stripped it, totally stripped it. So I was between a rock and a hard place, because that was our only, and by that time, the trains running back up to Westchester County were few and far between. You had to take a milk train. So we didn't get home till, well, at least daylight on the milk train going up there. But not only did I have a car stolen once in the city, but twice. The second time, the kid was just out for a joyride and left it somewhere, and that was fine because the car was good.
So, Peter, I've heard in the Helen Benedict house there's a special floor and bar that Helen Benedict saw was being removed from the old, maybe it's the Waldorf Astoria on Central Park South.
Yeah.
And she called up to the home, sent a bunch of the gardeners to come down. They packed it up, moved it up to the Helen Benedict house, and they built it into the house. So you probably remember that better than anyone. And since we're about to renovate, can you tell us the history of that?
Yeah. I mean, she really respected, history and authenticity and different things. And everything she had was quality in the house or in the old folks' home. There wasn't anything that I can recall that wasn't first class.
Right.
And when you walked in the house, you knew, wow, this is special. Wasn't a big house, but the grounds were gorgeous. And she respected nature. She loved nature. And, there was a stream going down and so forth. And she would take trips abroad and come back with wonderful things like the garden down there. They had the big, what was it called?
The thing that's out in front
You mean
of
the
house
gazebo?
now?
Yeah, the gazebo, but there was also
Are you talking about the Chinese?
yeah. Anyway, there's a lot. There are a lot of little mementos out there.
Do you remember that story about the dance floor that was relocated in the bar that Helen had transported?
I don't remember that story.
Yeah, somebody told me that story, and I was hoping to get more details. But
No, I don't remember that story, Mark.
Peter, you must be proud. Your grandmother, your mother, you, and now young Peter and Davis. That's a
Well, we're blessed because I have 3 kids. I have 2 daughters, one living in Louisville, Kentucky with her family, and one living in Boulder, Colorado with her family, and then my son. And that's by the marriage of Nancy and me. I was married briefly shortly after college, and that was a marriage at the time that was just too young. We just grew apart. And then when I went in the medical corps in the service, that really split it apart because I was gone for long periods of time. I never saw combat. Don't get me wrong, but I was stationed in the States in Fort Sam Houston, and I enjoyed the service because it was good duty, and then I was able to fly, because I already had a pilot's license. I was doing some flying there too, but I shortly thereafter married Nancy, and that's what carried the ball. And yes, we're very proud of Peter and Davis.
it's a strong commitment
Yeah.
by the Benedict family.
And can you just explain that, like, to somebody who doesn't, that generation and who has served? Can you just explain that lineage?
Well, my son was adopted. Peter was adopted in 1969 and raised in Vero Beach. And he went to St. Edward's School. And when he finished the 8th grade, because I wanted him to stand alone and he wanted to get out of the clutches of the headmaster, he went away to a boys' school up north. Probably the best decision that was ever made, because he didn't do well. He got the foot for 2 weeks for going to Philadelphia with his roommate, getting blasted, and they finally let him back in, and he did graduate and went on to college. And once he got through his, let's say, sophomore year at college, he began to get a focus on what he wanted to do. And then when he went to graduate school, he really did quite remarkably well. Unlike his father, who had a horrendous academic record, and which goes to prove, and I learned something from this, that you don't have to be a scholar to be a success. And if you're really determined to do something, and if you're in love with what you do, then you're going to be a success. You don't have to have the PhD from Harvard in education. And that allowed me to appreciate the fact that I always try and gave my students a second chance. And it usually worked out pretty well. A couple of times I blew it, but by and large, and by the way, the students that had to be dismissed for a couple of weeks or separated for a while, who were allowed back, they happen to be some of the most successful graduates of that school. There are several doctors that came back into town, quite a few nurses and so forth. And then others have gone into teaching. Some are back at St. Edward's School. So it proves to, not only cheer the A students, but the D students and the C- students. Because it takes a while for the teens to grow up. What a kid does at 15 isn't going to be the way he's going to be acting at 25. And once in a while, you have to tell a kid, you either get it straight or I recommend to your family, and usually when I made a recommendation, the family took it, you're going to do this. I tell you what was a great program was the Knowles course, the National Outdoor Leadership School. They have some tremendous courses for young people as well as, of course, mature adults that are throughout the country and through various periods of time. And so for some, I recommend Knowles. And then for the few that really had to take a bridge time before they went on to college, I did recommend the service. And I recommend the Marine Corps because I really believe in that. And I think that training would help them and discipline them. And instead of, traveling for a year, people can say, well, that's going to really enhance your education. And it does. But you spend some time in the Marine Corps, you'll get some travel time in. And believe me, you're going to come out a stronger, more mature person.
And along those lines, in terms of the board, what would you say to a younger person who may be in the position of stepping up soon and running the board? What do you think it would take to...
Well, I think if a person wants to step up, he's got to do it in his own merit. They're not going to just say, okay, Johnny, you will rise now. I think Johnny's got to prove himself because you don't want a jerk running a program for sure. And I think in some cases the family, and I'm sure I'm one of the people, I know I'm one of the people that are on the board because of my name, because of Helen Benedict. And don't think if it weren't for Helen Benedict and I was hanging out here in Vero Beach that I'd have been doing all that stuff. So I give my grandmother tremendous credit. The name Benedict has some authority, some weight. The name Andrus, my God, you hung the moon. But I'll settle for Benedict because I've been a lucky guy. Right, Nance?
Right.
Can you talk about the importance of having family members being involved, and then maybe also a little bit about the decision to have non-family members?
I think the last point I think is very critical because that is the one major change that has taken.
Can you include the question in your answer just so we can not have me in this part?
Yeah. I think one solid change for the better by far is to have outside people become part of the Surdna board because it brings an element of sophistication to the board. It brings a worldly view because you're almost like cocooned if you have a family only there when you think about it. But you bring some outside people in who are really strong in their areas and can bring something to the table. That's a huge benefit for the foundation and therefore the family.
Was that a difficult decision? Was everyone in agreement that this is something you should do?
Oh, I think it was discussed before it actually happened. I mean, you just didn't close your eyes and wake up and the next meeting there were some other people there. Now, that was discussed for a period of time, but I think all along people were becoming favorably involved with the idea.
Sounds good. I'm moving. Challenges, stories, and reflections.
We've covered a lot of that.
We have covered a lot of this.
Well, I have a question for you, Peter.
Yes.
Libby is still serving on the Andrews on Hudson board.
Thank
I don't
God.
know if you're aware of that. No, I agree.
I
Thank
am
God.
aware of that. Thank God.
Holding
My
on
son
to her,
says.
holding
thank
on to
God.
her as long as she'll let us
Yeah,
hold
my
on to
son
her.
says, thank God Libby's still a member of the
So
committee.
the board is at a moment where they're looking at new models for the facility because we're still a skilled nursing facility. And by the way, we are fully, everybody at
You heard
197.
that? Yeah, we want to make sure we
We're
get
at 197 as of, I think, Monday, so we're at full capacity. So
That's
it's
good.
really going well. It's a skilled nursing facility, but the board is embarking on a time where they're going to try to diversify the type of services they provide, maybe talk to the community, see what they need.
Yeah.
What advice would you give those board members that are sitting around the board as far as making a decision and how you made decisions when you were on that board? Because you have a younger group, we still have Libby, but what would you tell that board if you could tell them regarding their decision process?
Well, I would think that they should expedite it. I think there's got to be more forceful leadership. I'm not. Who's the leader? I don't know. Who's the leader of the board? Okay. Well, I don't know, Kate. So that's good. But
No,
yeah,
McCain.
Hmm?
McCain.
Okay, that's great. God bless him, McCain. Anyway, the point is. Jesus Christ. Anyway, getting back to Mark's question.
Sorry.
I think there has to be someone on that board, some board members who are resolute in making a determination on getting something done. I have a brother-in-law on the board, and he, for a while, was sending me a little critique about the
Bob
meetings.
Hedlund.
And I looked at it and I said to Nancy, I said, it's like I was reading something that took place 20 years ago. The same things are on the paper. And I called Bob Hedlund and I said, Bob, I'm still alive. I'm reading what's happened before, but what the hell is going on? And then the next critique was basically the same, and they're trying this, that, and the other thing. But there has been no forward progress from the same 6 or 7 essential concerns that were on the table when I was there. And I know one of the many failures I've had, and boy, I really blew this one. Somebody had the bright idea that we should consider partnering with another institution because we were struggling. And I, in my naivete, thought, gee, that's a pretty good idea. So it took months, but we finally found what we thought would be a collegial match. And we had the so-called consultants come in, and God knows consultants. But anyway, they came in and suggested this and that and the other thing. And so we started to partner with this group. Well, it turns out it didn't get very far at all. And we ended up spending a fortune getting out of that agreement. And I remember going to all kinds of legal contestations and so forth in the city about the matter, and up in Hastings and so forth. And the town was going crazy because one of the things about the partnering was we were going to expand the home for outside people to come in and do things, such as coming in like adult daycare facilities and stuff like this outside the building, and really kind of embellish it. But the town was up in arms about any additional building there, period. I mean, they were rock solid against it. And I've been booed many times, but I remember making a presentation to the Hastings County Commission and City Council, and the place was jammed. And I tried to tell them, what the benefits are going to be, not only of these people, but to the community. And I was booed off the stage like you wouldn't believe it. I mean, I didn't actually leave the stage, but it's not a popular situation by any means.
Well,
So
talk about the consultant board member, and it seems like boards these days get too dependent on the consultant.
I will tell you this, Mark, right out flat. I feel very strongly that Oh, I'm not a consultant guy. My feeling is that if I can't solve the problem, or if I don't have somebody on the board being able to solve the problem, or several people, then I shouldn't be here. But people always think, and I'm going to use the school as an example because that's kind of nebulous in this case. There were a couple of rocky times, and the board members always wanted to get a consultant. And the first time I basically said, yeah, okay, let's give it a shot. And it turned out, of course, the consultant comes in, gets paid big money, and takes a day and a half out of your work schedule, and recommends this and that and the other thing. And in 6 months, all the recommendations are out the window anyway. And that happened once more. And then after that, I said, look, number one, while I'm here, and I was there 30 years, there's no way a consultant's going to be part of the program. So that did that. And then another example, and I'm proud of this one in the sense that when I retired, my successor, there were two, just blew the place apart. The command decisions that were necessary and the command presence that were necessary were not there. They did not understand finances, and the school it was a big operation, big operation. And they didn't know what to do, so they kind of bobbed and weaved for several years. But they put it in $18 million debt. And when I retired from the school, I literally stepped aside. The one thing I know is you have to know when to say when, both for the good of the institution and for the good of the individual. You need to have another spark come in there, some more youth, some more vitality, some more energy. So I stepped aside and got involved with many other projects in the community. And I kind of stayed out of the fray. And a couple of years went by. And I always remember this one night, and the board changed. That was a key situation. Here's a situation where we had two weak heads and horrendous leadership on the board, and the place just tanked. And I was, I was sad because a lot of people worked hard to put that together. So anyway, one night, out of the blue, a phone call comes in from a gentleman that I highly respect in town, who wanted to have dinner with me. And I said, I don't do dinners anymore, because I was out forever, during those days. I don't do dinners anymore. But I will meet you for breakfast from 7:30 to 8:30 at this little place called the Lemon Tree, right up the road from where you were staying. So the board chair and the vice chair and I had breakfast at this place. It's a little low-key place. And they said, Peter, the reason we wanted to meet with you is to tell you the fact that we're about to turn the key on the school. In other words, the debt was so huge, the school couldn't keep it up. And they said, we only have one last place to go. And they said, for your leadership, we want you to hire a search firm to help get what we think might be somebody who can help us out here. And I said, first of all, if I'm going to help you, I don't want any search firm. Second of all, if I do the job, great. If I don't do it, at least I'll give it my best. But the third thing, and here is the key, if I don't find somebody in 72 hours, then you're looking at the wrong guy. And they were desperate, but they looked at me and said, how in the world could this happen? So as Nancy knows, I came back here and made phone calls upon phone calls upon phone calls. West Coast, because I was in the business for so long, I knew a lot of people who knew a lot of people, et cetera, et cetera. Finally, I was beginning to wonder if I was going to have any success. But I always thought that, hang on a little bit, we're only 12 hours into this thing. Anyway, I make a call, and there's a long story behind it, but anyway, I make a call, got this gentleman in Philadelphia. And you can tell a lot after a certain age by the voice of the individual, the tone of the individual, about his personality on the phone. And it didn't take long. I liked the guy. I mean, he had some chutzpah. I could tell in his voice. And he was a solid human being and did a good job. And I said, look, I want to present something that's off the wall to you. I said, my name, he knew my name. And I said, we got a school down here that is about to close its doors, that has lost a lot of enrollment. I mean, hundreds of kids. That's a lot of kids to lose. Yeah. And one thing or another. And the more I talked about the negativeness, because I didn't want to talk about positiveness, because there wasn't that much positive to talk about. The guy says, well, I might be interested. And I said, well, are you interested or not? He said, yeah, I'm interested. I said, if you're interested, today is Tuesday X. By Thursday, I want you to come down here. I want to meet you. I want to show you the campus and see if your interest continues, because if not, so be it. So he comes down. Right away, we hit it off. He looked at the place, and it's a beautiful facility. I mean, it is absolutely gorgeous. And he liked what he saw, and he realized there was potential, but the $18 million was a concern. And I said, it should be. If it didn't, he wouldn't be the guy for us. So he says, let me go back and talk to my wife. And then he calls back a couple hours later and says, yeah, he'd like to take the job. In the meantime, I called the guy, the two men, the chair and the vice chair, about the 72 hours, because I already had the guy in my pocket. And I gave them the resume after about maybe 18 hours, and they were impressed with that. And the guy has done a sensational job. He pulled us out of an $18 million debt. That's a lot of money. I mean, in certain ways, it's nothing. But in this small world, in this small school, in this small town, 18 million's a lot. And now the place is thriving. I am so happy. That's probably one of the biggest accomplishments I really feel I had a lot to do with. And people, even today, oh God, thank you so much, for getting Mike Mursky. And one humorous thing is, the name of the school is St. Edward's, right? Named after so-called St. Edward, whoever the hell he was. He said,
Actually, I have to cut for 1 second.
Okay.
oh, Mike Mursky.
Good story about Mike
What the
Mursky.
humorous thing here
But
about
you
Mike.
found him.
Yeah, okay. When I was in the interview process, Mike knew, of course, it was an Episcopal school. And we talked and talked. He says, well, he said, I'm Jewish. And I said, well, it's not my fault. And he just roared. And of course, the board chair wondered, how he was going to fit in.
Right.
And I said, don't worry, it's 2000, what was it, 13 then. Yeah, he's fit in beautifully and does a great job. And he doesn't, proselyte the faith. He's part of the program. And I'll never forget that when he said, but God, he said, I'm Jewish.
So I guess I have to ask you if there's any stories you can remember like that, or specifics that pertain to Surdna or your time on the board, or specific grants that have crazy impact.
Well, golly, I think we've kind of been that route a little bit.
Yeah.
Nothing really stands out. At a certain age, I guess blessedly so, you forget a lot of things. You do. And I've obviously forgotten a lot of things.
I'll mention one funny story I heard from John Hawkins, one of your former board members, that when he was a teenager, he used to visit Helen at the Helen Benedict house, and at one point gave him one of her secondary Rolls Royces.
That's right. Yeah, I remember that.
Now when I heard that story, I thought that was pretty interesting.
Well,
So
it was interesting. She, when my grandmother grew up, she was under a tight rein. Her father, John Andrus, was very, very, very parsimonious. And she married a 1909 All-American Yale football player who played right next to her brother on the Yale team. And her father tried to, basically talk her out of it, but you know, at the young age, she went ahead and married the guy. Of course, it lasted about 6 months. Because, you know, if you're a hero on the football field, in 1909, there was only one All-American team. It's not like every, you know, it's offense, defense, special teams, and all that was one team. And my grandmother's brother was on that team with her now husband. And John Anderson was so wise. He said, you know, this is according to my grandmother, he said, he will always live that moment. He will not basically amount to anything. So I'm not going to help you out in this divorce. Just get it and get out. So she ended up making hats or something in Boston, something like that. And so she lived a very austere kind of life for a long time. Anyway, her father dies finally, and obviously she gets a few bucks, and so she's coming out a little bit now. And she had 3 things she loved: jewelry, and jewelry. If I walk in, and I did several times, walk in the Cartier's or Tiffany in New York. Oh, hello, Mrs. Benedict, so great to see you. And of course, outside was Red, the trusty chauffeur, and the Rolls Royce, you know, the whole package. And that was her first. She loved jewelry, and she had a lot of it. The second thing was cars. She always had one kind of a sporty car. But then she had not one, but 2 Rolls Royces. And, you know, she would alternate them depending upon the day or the evening or whatever. And I remember occasionally when I was visiting, she loved the theater, and she would take us to the theater, and Red would drive us in a Rolls Royce. Now, even in those days, Rolls were very few and far between. So when you pull up in front of the theater, you know, wow, look at, you know, everybody, you know, kind of surrounded you. And then they saw us come out and kind of dispersed, realizing that, unfortunately, there wasn't Hollywood. And then we came back out again, and the car was right there. The police never, ever touched it, because I'm sure Red, the chauffeur, gave the police a few bucks. And the same thing with going to dinner in New York. You go in with one of the Rolls Royces, and Red was there with his little cap on, you know, and everything, and stood outside, you know, opened the door for my grandmother. And that was the other thing she liked with the cars. And then shoes. She made Imelda Marcos look like a first grader. She had shoes upon shoes upon shoes. But nothing like her jewelry. I mean, she dressed it like a damn queen. And once in a while, I have to tell her to tone it down, you know. I remember I was at this boarding school up north, which I hated. And there was a parents' weekend. And my grandmother was, I guess, my parent. So she wanted to come up. And I said, listen, you may come up, but promise me you will not bring the rolls. And for heaven's sakes, if Red comes, have him not wear a uniform. And I wasn't a very good, well, I was a horrible scholar, but I was a pretty good athlete. And, you know, because it's Parents' Weekend, the football team was playing. And I was proud of that, because I knew if my grandmother came up, she'd see me playing football. And literally about 15 minutes, we had our warm-ups. I see her come in the stands and, you know, kind of wave to her and so forth. And I know she was kind of dressed up, but, you know, okay. She wasn't wearing a lot of jewelry. And the game occurred, you know, and that lasted, what, an hour and a half, maybe, hour and 45 minutes. Then after the game, everybody, the parents and the team and others, were invited into this commons room for, you know, tea and crumpets or some such thing. And on the way in there, in the main walkway, right outside the walkway, was the Rolls Royce. And right out there by the walkway was Red Walski. And I gave Red the finger. I said, what the hell are you doing here? You know, you were told not to wear the uniform, Red, and I love the guy. And fortunately, when I went in, I kind of skirted the area, you know, so I was a little evasive there. But when it was over, I walked my grandmother out to the car. And of course, just as that happens, everybody else kind of comes out. And all my buddies see me opening the door. Red was opening it, but I was there to say, hug her goodbye and so forth. And when she left, I said, thank God, because I was humiliated. I didn't like to have the show off of the Bucks, you know. I didn't want to plead, you know, humbleness by any means, but I didn't like all the toots and whistles that came along with that lifestyle for a while. Hell, love it now if it happened, believe me. I think one of my, I mentioned the things that my grandma loved, but one of my loves in life, I love flying. I was in aerobatics, and I had several aerobatic planes. That's one great thing about having a few bucks. And the aerobatic planes were strong, competitive planes, because I used to love to compete, never did very well. But they had the red, white, and blue paint design, smoke system, and highly modified. And I probably did aerobatics from the time I was maybe 18 till, I don't know, was I 50 or something like that? Let's say 50 years old. And I got to be reasonably good, reasonably competent. And what made me so was competition with others, because I love competition. One morning I woke up, I said, Nancy, that's it, I'm going to sell the planes. And I put them on the market through a friend of mine here in town, and they were prized possessions, and they were sold by the next day. And then I took up riding a Harley like everybody else.
You used to go to Sturgis.
I used to go to Sturgis. I went out west many times. I took a lot of trips with other people, had a great time with that, and I had that for about maybe 15 to 20 years. And once again, I woke up in the morning, I said, Nancy, the Harley's got to go. I never dropped it. But with the amount of traffic coming and, you know, the fact is you're lucky not to be nailed by that. I always have been involved with, you know, with exercise and activities. I mean, I ran a couple of marathons, and I got into triathlons. And I'm not talking about the Ironman, I'm talking about what they call sprint triathlons, which basically involved maybe a half-mile swim, usually about a 10 to 13 mile bike and a 6-mile run. And I did 42 of those. And the last one was one, fortunately it was in the state, it was in Sarasota, where I got hit by a car during the triathlon. The car was going 40 to 42 miles an hour, broke the legs, everything. And it took about a year to get back in reasonably good shape, yeah. And so I haven't done any more triathlons, obviously. But I always enjoyed the, you know.
Are you still swimming a lot?
I swim a little bit, yeah.
Because you used to swim in the ocean. I mean,
Yeah,
we were visiting you, and you showed me where your Sunrunners, was that the name
Yeah,
of your group?
Sunrunners, yeah, that's right.
Sunrunners,
Yeah,
and
good.
you used to
Mark,
swim.
you are incredible.
And you used to swim in the open ocean
Yeah.
for, how far did you swim?
Oh, half mile up, half mile back.
Okay. I remember that.
I think they're signaling to cut it off. You hear the whistle? The siren?
Well, a few more questions.
I feel embarrassed. I mean, I'm taking so much time for heaven's
No,
sakes.
we're
You guys
so
are
happy
busy.
to
I
have
have
you.
to bring it back a little bit to the family and to the foundation. So you talk about your grandmother and jewelry, and why do you think? I mean, she could have lived a lifestyle of just that, and you know, why do you think it was so important and is important to your family to also give?
I think we were born with the work ethic.
Can,
Yeah, I think so. I mean, she always had the work ethic. You know, I don't know how I got the work ethic, but I know because I could have gone south. I mean, I could have been the playboy of the Western world, but I didn't. But I think my grandmother exemplified all what's right, and I know, I respected her leadership. She led by example. You know, she lived a strong life. She never, you know, she had a few pops at night, but that's it, you know. Didn't smoke. Always saw her in always a lady, always a lady. Even around the house, she was a lady. And I think I learned a lot. Well, I know I learned a lot by living under her roof and having the privilege to do that. When I was much younger, she scared the hell out of me. I mean, wow. She was, as I said, when we first started, she was a force. But then an incident happened that changed our relationship. When I was still on the second floor recovering from that illness, I was able to get involved with model trains. And I would make these HO gauge trains and build a little village. And one area was fortunately big enough to have a fairly substantial size train layout. And she came back from New York one day and saw me doing something, wasting a lot of tissue paper to build some bridges or something with some kind of a cement top or something. And she went berserk, wasting all that paper. And I remember I stood up to her, and I was above her height now. And I looked at her in the eye and said, "So what?" And you know, ever since then, the relationship changed, because she knew I wasn't going to be the recipient of her orders. I mean, my poor mother, you know, if she went out at night with somebody, she came back, you know, she was living, when you live under somebody's roof, you live by their law. If you're to be back, I don't care whether you're 40 years old or, you know, 20 years old, I want you back by midnight. So you can imagine the life that went on there. But once our relationship had been, you might say, reestablished, and once I stood up to her, I always stood up to her, but that was the first time I did. I was probably 14. Thank God I was big, but it just came out so naturally. And I think it was God-given that it happened.
I'm going to harp a little bit more on this work ethic idea and talk a little bit more about why it was important to give and give back.
Well, I think you want to make a difference, right? I mean, you don't want to go through life and look back and say, "Oh, I wish I'd done that." You want to do it. And I think that's very important to respond to your inner desires, assuming you have it. And I recall giving advice, to a couple of kids along the way at the school. And I said, the one thing you don't want to do is to get to be a certain age and say, "Oh, I wish I'd done that." Because you never know about your health. It's the most precious thing in life. You might be a fireball today, but tomorrow, the ball game's over. So you got to take advantage of every day. You've got to have a positive attitude. You've got to look at things optimistically. And you have to eat nutritiously, and you got to exercise. You get those 4 or 5 components going for you, and you have a will to do something worthwhile for others, you're going to be successful.
Cue in the airplane.
We were just talking about airplanes.
That was wonderful.
No, it's on cue, right?
That was a great.
Okay?
Is there anything else that
No.
you want to add?
I thank God bless you. We've been at it.
Anything you guys wanna ask?
We've been at it for a
Okay,
long time, and
yeah.
you've been so darn patient.
You've been great, Peter.
And,
You've been patient.
You've been the best, man.
Okay, you are off the hook.
Hey, I'm off the hook.
You're
God bless
free.
you. Well, let's see. Let's start here. And I want to go through a couple of them, and then that's it, okay? We're not going to spend much time here. Ready?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, this is the article when I retired from St. Edward's School in the paper. Goodbye, Mr. Benedict, with the opinion. And the cartoon says, "We've been expecting you." In other words, it's time to move on, and that's terrific. This is a resolution from the school and the committee's board chair article in a magazine here. I used to give blue slips to the kids that did well, and that came from the family. And here are some planes. That's the Pitt Special. That's the one that I did a lot of aerobatics in. Great Lakes. Good picture of the Great Lakes. This is all the licenses I have for flying. Multi-engine land and sea helicopter and so forth. And then the campuses, that's the lower school campus over here. We have since sold that building and it's going to be now a development, and we've combined everything in the upper school. Here is the upper school, probably taken shortly, probably about 1990. It's changed a lot. It's on the river. It's got great location. There's another picture of the upper school there. And then, here's an example of what the school looked like when I first took over. That was the upper school right there in that sand, that one rectangular piece there. So it went from there up to there. So that's visual concept of, what you did and what you didn't do and so forth. And over here, this is a marathon award from the Marine Corps Marathon. And wow, this is Alumni Achievement Award at college, and a few other things. We have a foundation called the Benedict Foundation, which gives to independent school, and it received an award there a couple of years ago. So that's about the name of the game.
In a quick nutshell, like under a minute, could you tell the story of the parrot?
Of the parrot?
Yeah.
I will tell you the story of the parrot because it is a keeper. When I took over the school, it started in '65. I came in '69. There were 4 headmasters prior to my arrival, so once again, the red flag went up about taking the job. You have to be a risk. My feeling is you have to take risks in life, and hopefully you'll succeed in most of them. And I came to St. Edward's the first year, and things went okay. And struggling financially and everything else, but it went all right. At the end of the year, there was this big athletic banquet. We only had, I think at the time, maybe 200 students max. And I was about to wrap things up. And the board chair presented me with this parrot. And I thought to myself, what in God's name are we going to do with the parrot? Well, I'll leave them in the office. I think the kids might enjoy them, the families might enjoy them when they come in. Problem was, the kids got so enamored with it that the bird didn't have any downtime. So we had to bring it home here. It's been here with us ever since. And
How long?
oh, we've had it since 45 years maybe.
Oh,
And at least, as I was telling Libs, they're supposed to live to 50. But my wife, Nancy, takes such good care of the parrot. She gives it tremendous nourishment, and never been to a vet. I think it's been one time to a vet. But it's always right around that cage. You can open the sliding window there, the door, and it won't fly out. It just likes it where it is. They like a routine, like we do. So Basil's part of the family. And of course, Nancy's so much involved with dogs. She was the president of the Humane Society for many, many years. And at one point in our other location, we had 5 dogs at one time. But here, we can just, and at our age, it's best to do just have one dog that you love and devote and time. Adios, amigo.
All right. One shot of the parrot, and then we're
I should
done.
get all these cutaways too.
Can't get enough of the wildlife.
Shuts up for the all day.
Hello.
I'll back up the room. Does not like the room.
Hi.
All right.